Hello, my good friends. How are you today? May God bless you all. I will not introduce anything, you guys. Watch the video and feel it. Then let's evaluate together. I never believed in fairy tales, not the kind with princes and castles anyway. My world was built on the grit of my grandparents' dreams, the sizzle of soul food on a hot griddle, and the heartbeat of a community that felt like family. But then he walked into my restaurant, and everything I thought I knew about enemies, love, and second chances turned upside down. My name is Millionaire Johnson, and this is the story of how I went from hating Elijah Stone, a billionaire hell-bent on tearing down my legacy, to finding a love I never saw coming. Stay with me because this journey is wild, raw, and full of surprises. The air in Sweet Heritage's kitchen was thick with the scent of cinnamon and brown sugar curling up from the peach cobbler I was testing. It was late afternoon in Bronzeville, Chicago, and the golden light slanted through the windows, catching flecks of flour dust in the air. Outside, the street hummed with life. Kids laughing on the sidewalk. The faint wail of a saxophone from the jazz bar down the block. The rhythmic clatter of a passing L train. This was my world, my home. Sweet Heritage wasn't just a restaurant. It was a living memory. Every scratch on the hardwood floors, every black and white photo on the walls, told a story of my grandparents who'd come north during the Great Migration with nothing but a hot plate and a dream. My daddy carried that dream until he passed 3 years ago, leaving me to guard it with everything I had. I was scribbling notes on my recipe card when Lisa, my hostess, burst through the swinging doors, her braids swinging and her eyes wide with panic. "Malene, there's a guy out front asking for the owner," she whispered like she was delivering news of a storm. "He's all fancy suit and tie. Says it's urgent." I wiped my hands on my apron, the cotton ruff against my palms, and forced a professional smile. "Probably another vendor trying to sell me overpriced napkins," I said. But Lisa's nervous glance told me this was different. I straightened my shoulders, smoothed my curls, and pushed through the doors into the dining room. That's when I saw him. Elijah Stone stood by the hostess stand, 6-foot-something of pure arrogance, wrapped in an Italian suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. The light from the chandelier caught the sharp angles of his jaw, casting shadows that made him look like he'd stepped out of a magazine. His dark hair was slicked back and his eyes cold. Steely blue swept the room like he was calculating its worth. The chatter of customers faded as heads turned, the air shifting with his presence. I felt it too, a prickle on my skin like the moment before a lightning strike. I pushed it down. Whoever this guy was, he wasn't here to eat. "Miss Johnson?" he said, not asking, but stating his voice smooth and controlled like he was used to being obeyed. His gaze locked on me, and for a split second those icy eyes softened, a flicker of something I couldn't place. Then they hardened again, and I squared my shoulders. "That's me," I said, crossing my arms. "Millionaire Johnson. You the one scaring my staff." A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Elijah Stone Development." He paused, letting the name sink in like it was supposed to mean something. It did. Everyone in Bronzeville knew Stone Development, the company that turned historic neighborhoods into glass towers for the rich. My stomach tightened. "I've purchased this building," he continued, his tone clipped. "We'll be breaking ground on luxury condominiums in 90 days. I wanted to inform you personally." The room spun. My restaurant, my legacy, my life. The photos on the walls, my grandparents on opening day, my daddy laughing with customers flashed in my mind. This place wasn't just brick and mortar. It was my grandmother's hands kneading biscuit dough, the smell of her sweet potato pie, the sound of Sunday soul suppers filled with laughter. And this man with his tailored suit and cold eyes was talking about destroying it. He was still talking something about a generous relocation package and fair market value, but his words blurred into static. My hands clenched into fists, nails biting into my palms. "This restaurant isn't for sale. I said, my voice steadier than I felt. And neither am I, Mr. Stone. His smile widened, but it was sharp like a predator sizing up prey. Everyone has a price. Miss Johnson, he said, stepping closer. The scent of his cologne sandalwood and something darker hit me, and I hated how it lingered in the air. You just haven't heard yours yet. I stepped forward too, closing the distance, refusing to back down. You don't know me, I said, my voice low, each word deliberate. You don't know this place. You can't buy what's not for sale. For a moment, neither of us moved. The dining room was silent. Customers watching forks paused mid-air. His eyes searched mine, and I felt that prickle again, hotter this time, like a spark catching dry wood. His gaze dropped to my lips just for a heartbeat before snapping back up. We'll see, he said, his voice softer now, almost a challenge. Then he turned his polished shoes, clicking on the hardwood as he walked out, leaving the bell above the door chiming in his wake. Lisa let out a breath. Who was that? Trouble, I muttered, my heart still pounding. I told myself it was anger, nothing else. But as I watched his silhouette disappear into the neon glow of Bronzeville's streets, I couldn't shake the feeling that Elijah Stone wasn't done with me yet. Back in the kitchen, I tried to focus on my cobbler, but my hands shook as I measured sugar. Lisa hovered, chewing her lip. You okay? Malene, that guy looked like he eats small businesses for breakfast. I'm fine, I lied, stirring the batter harder than necessary. He's just another developer who thinks money solves everything. Renee, my best friend and part-time bartender, pushed through the doors, her locks pulled into a high bun. She'd been out front pouring drinks during the showdown and caught every word. Malene, that was Elijah Stone. She said, her voice low, like she was naming a supervillain. Stone Development's got a reputation. They don't just buy buildings, they erase histories. You need to be careful. Careful, I snorted, slamming the mixing bowl on the counter. Flour puffed into the air. I'm not letting some rich boy in a suit take what my family built. Renee raised an eyebrow. Rich boy, huh? Looked like he was sizing you up for more than just a deal. My face heated and I turned away, grabbing a whisk. Don't start, Renee. He's the enemy, plain and simple. She laughed, but it was laced with worry. Enemy or not, he's got power. And those eyes, trouble with a capital T. I ignored her, focusing on the cobbler. But my mind kept replaying Elijah's voice, that faint smile, the way his fingers had brushed mine when he handed me his business card. I'd shoved it in my apron pocket without looking. But now I pulled it out. Heavy cardstock embossed with his name in gold. Arrogant, just like him. I tore it in half and tossed it in the trash. That night, the dinner rush kept me busy, but Elijah's words haunted me. Everyone has a price. The nerve of him thinking he could waltz in and dismantle my world. As I greeted regulars, Mr. Washington, who'd been coming for 40 years, little Aisha celebrating her 10th birthday with a slice of pie, I felt the weight of what was at stake. This wasn't just my restaurant. It was the soul of Bronzeville, a place where people came for more than food. They came for home. Around 8, Lisa called me to the front. Another one of those guys, she whispered, nodding toward a man in a cheap suit holding an envelope. Said, it's for you. I took the envelope, my stomach sinking. The Stone Development logo stared back at me, sleek and predatory. Inside was a formal offer, a number with too many zeros, and a note in Elijah's precise handwriting. Let's talk. E.S. I ripped it up the paper, shredding under my fingers, and handed the pieces back to the messenger. Tell your boss he can keep his money. The man blinked clearly, not used to rejection, Miss Johnson. You should out, I said, pointing to the door. He scurried off and Lisa high-fived me. That's my girl, she said, grinning. But, you sure you want to poke the bear? I'm not poking, I said, wiping my hands on my apron. I'm fighting. Closing time came late, the last customers lingering over coffee and stories. I sent Lisa home and locked the front door, the bell chiming softly. The dining room was quiet now, the only sound the hum of the fridge and the distant pulse of Bronzeville's nightlife. I walked to the wall of photos, my fingers tracing the frame of my grandparents' picture. They stood outside Sweet Heritage on opening day, young and proud, their hands clasped tight. My daddy's laugh echoed in my memory, his voice saying, "This place is our heart, Malene. Don't ever let it go." I wouldn't. Not for money, not for Elijah Stone. But as I turned off the lights, the memory of his touch came back unbidden, the brief electric brush of his fingers against mine. My skin tingled, and I cursed myself for noticing he was the enemy, a man who saw my home as a line item on a spreadsheet. So why did my pulse quicken at the thought of seeing him again? Why did I feel like this was only the beginning? I stepped outside, locking the door behind me. The neon signs of Bronzeville glowed in the dark, casting a warm light on the sidewalk. Somewhere down the street, a car engine purred, sleek and expensive. I didn't need to look to know it was him watching from the shadows. My heart thudded, but I raised my chin and walked home, the night air cool against my skin. This was war, and I wasn't backing down. If you're hooked on this clash of wills, you're not alone. My battle with Elijah Stone turned into a love story I never expected, full of passion, betrayal, and second chances. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell to join me on this roller coaster. Drop a comment below. Should I keep fighting this billionaire? Or is there more to him than meets the eye? Let me know what you think. The morning after Elijah Stone's bombshell, I woke to the sound of rain drumming against my apartment window, a steady rhythm that matched the unease in my chest. His words echoed in my mind. Everyone has a price. Miss Johnson, arrogant, infuriating, and yet the memory of his touch, those fleeting seconds when his fingers brushed mine, lingered like a song. I couldn't shake. I pushed it away, focusing on the fight ahead. Sweet Heritage was my family's legacy, the heart of Bronzeville. No billionaire, no matter how piercing his eyes, was going to take it from me. I arrived at the restaurant early, the air heavy with the scent of wet pavement and coffee brewing in the back. The dining room was quiet, the photos on the walls watching me like silent guardians. I was wiping down tables when I found a cream-colored envelope slipped under the front door, the Stone Development logo glaring at me like a challenge. My fingers trembled as I opened it. Another offer, the number even higher than before, and that same handwritten note. "Let's talk. E.S." The paper crinkled as I tore it to shreds, my pulse racing. Did he think he could wear me down with bigger checks? I tossed the pieces into the trash, but his name burned in my mind, sharp and unwelcome. The lunch rush kept me busy, the clatter of plates and chatter of customers, a welcome distraction. Lisa, her sketchbook tucked under her arm, was sketching ideas for a mural to celebrate Sweet Heritage's history. "We'll show that suit who's boss," she said, her pencil scratching out a rough outline of my grandparents' photo. I smiled, but my nerves were frayed. Every jingle of the bell above the door made me brace for another messenger from Stone Development. Around 6, the dinner crowd filled the restaurant, the air alive with laughter and the sizzle of fried chicken. I was pouring sweet tea for Mr. Washington when Lisa caught my eye. Her expression tense. "He's back," she whispered, nodding toward the last empty table by the window. Elijah Stone sat there, his suit jacket draped over the chair, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. The chandelier's soft glow caught the planes of his face, highlighting the faint stubble along his jaw. He looked out of place among the worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs, yet he sat with an ease that made my skin prickle. Customers glanced his way, their whispers buzzing like static. I felt it too, that magnetic pull, but I buried it under a wave of anger. He wasn't here for dinner, he was here to push. I strode over, my apron tied tight, my professional smile sharper than a knife. "Mr. Stone," I said, my voice cool, "we're fully booked tonight. Perhaps you'd like to make a reservation for another time." His eyes met mine, deep blue and glinting with amusement. "I just want dinner, Miss Johnson," he said, leaning back in his chair, his voice low and deliberate. "Unless you're in the habit of turning away paying customers." The challenge in his tone sparked something in me, a mix of defiance and curiosity. I grabbed a menu and slapped it on the table. "Chef's special tonight is my daddy's smothered pork chops," I said, holding his gaze. "They take 40 minutes to prepare properly. Sure, you can wait." He didn't flinch. "I've got nowhere else to be," he said, his lips curving into a half-smile that sent a shiver down my spine. I turned away, my face hot, cursing the way my body betrayed me. He was the enemy, nothing more. In the kitchen, I relayed the order to Darius, my cousin, who'd just arrived from New Orleans to help out. His chef's coat was already stained with hot sauce, his dreads tied back as he chopped onions with a vengeance. "Who's the suit out there?" he asked, his knife flashing. "Lisa says he's trouble." "Elijah Stone," I said, keeping my voice steady. "The guy who wants to bulldoze this place." Darius snorted, his brown eyes narrowing. "Let him try. I'll serve him a knuckle sandwich instead of pork chops." I laughed, but it was strained. "Just make the food. D, let me handle him." As I moved through the dining room, greeting regulars and refilling glasses, I felt Elijah's eyes on me, not blatant, but steady, like a current beneath the surface. He watched the way I remembered every customer's name, the way I helped an elderly woman to her chair, the way I laughed with Aisha when she showed me her birthday crown. I pretended not to notice, but every glance from him was a spark igniting something I refused to name. When his food was ready, I carried the plate myself, the steam rising in curls that caught the light. I set it down and our hands brushed again. The contact was brief, but it was like touching a live wire. My breath caught, and I saw his fingers pause, his knuckles whitening as he gripped the edge of the pie table. The air between us thickened, charged with something unspoken. I stepped back, my heart pounding against my ribs. "Enjoy," I said, my voice tighter than I meant. He looked up, his eyes locking on mine, and for a moment, the world narrowed to just us. The clink of silverware, the hum of conversation. It all faded. "This smells incredible," he said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. He took a bite and his expression changed, surprise, then something deeper, like he was tasting more than just food. "This is," he paused, searching for words, "extraordinary." The compliment hit me harder than it should have. I wanted to snap back to remind him he was here to destroy everything this food stood for. But the way he looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time stole my words. I turned away, my cheeks burning, and threw myself into work, ignoring the heat that lingered where our hands had touched. Half an hour later, a woman walked in, her heels clicking like gunshots on the hardwood. She was tall, her blonde hair pulled into a sleek ponytail, her red dress hugging curves that turned heads. She scanned the room, her lips curling into a smile when she spotted Elijah. My stomach twisted as she sauntered to his table, her hand resting on his shoulder a little too long. "Elijah, darling," she said, her voice syrupy. "What are you doing in a place like this? I thought we were meeting downtown." I was close enough to hear refilling a water pitcher at the next table. Elijah's jaw tightened, but he didn't pull away. "Vanessa," he said, his tone neutral, "I'm having dinner. We'll talk later." Vanessa's eyes flicked to me, sharp and assessing, like she was sizing up a rival. "Oh, I see," she said, her smile turning brittle, slumming it for a change. "Be careful." "Elijah." Places like this can be distracting. My grip on the pitcher tightened, water sloshing. If you don't like the vibe, I said, stepping forward, my voice sweet but edged. The door's right there. Her smile didn't waver, but her eyes narrowed. No offense, sweetheart, she said, standing, just looking out for my colleague. She leaned down, whispering something in Elijah's ear, then left her perfume trailing like a warning. I looked at Elijah, expecting an explanation, but he just picked up his fork, his expression unreadable. Friend of yours? I asked, unable to stop myself. Colleague, he said, his voice clipped. She's not important. But the way she'd touched him, the way she'd looked at me, said otherwise. I walked away, my chest tight, telling myself I didn't care. He was a threat, not a man I should be noticing. As the night wound down, Darius pulled me aside in the kitchen, his hands still dusted with flour. That Stone guy, he said, his voice low. He's bad news, Malene. I heard stories in New Orleans. His company's got a trail of broken promises. Don't let him play you. He's not playing me, I said, but my voice lacked conviction. He's just trying to wear me down. Darius raised an eyebrow. Yeah? Then why's he looking at you like you're the main course? I swatted him with a dish towel, but my laugh was forced. Go clean the grill. D. After closing, I sent Darius and Lisa home and locked up alone. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets slick and shimmering under Bronzeville's neon lights. I was about to head out when I saw Elijah across the street, leaning against a sleek black car, his silhouette sharp against the glow of a street lamp. He wasn't looking at me, but I felt his presence like a weight. Walk with me, he said, his voice carrying over the quiet street. Not a command, but close. So you can convince me to sell? I shot back, crossing my arms. No thanks. So I can understand why this place matters to you, he said, stepping closer. His shirt was slightly rumpled now, the top button undone, and the streetlight caught the curve of his collarbone. My mouth went dry, and I hated myself for noticing. Against my better judgment, I nodded. Fine, but don't expect me to change my mind. We walked down the Bandai street, the air cool and damp, the sounds of Bronzeville wrapping around us. Distant laughter, the clink of glasses from a bar, the soft wail of a saxophone. I told him about my grandparents, their journey north, the hot plate they'd used to start it all. He listened, really listened. His usual sharpness softened by the night. Why do you fight so hard for this? He asked, stopping under a flickering street lamp. His eyes searched mine, and the space between us felt too small, too charged. Because it's home, I said, my voice catching. Not just for me, but for everyone who walks through those doors. You wouldn't understand. He stepped closer, his shadow falling over me. Maybe I want to, he said, his voice low, almost a whisper. The light caught his eyes, making them glow like the heart of a flame. My breath hitched, and for a moment I thought he might touch me. I wanted him to, and I hated myself for it. I stepped back, breaking the spell. Good night, Mr. Stone, I said, turning away, my heart pounding like a drum. As I walked home, the saxophone's mournful notes followed me, and I knew this was far from over. Elijah, Stone wasn't just a threat to my restaurant. He was a threat to my heart. The rain didn't stop for days. It battered Bronzeville streets, turning the sidewalks into rivers and the neon signs into blurred halos. I barely slept. My dreams haunted by Elijah Stone's voice, his shadow under the street lamp, the way his eyes had burned into mine. Maybe I want to understand. His words were a hook in my heart, pulling me towards something I couldn't name. But every time I thought of him, I saw that envelope, the Stone Development logo, the threat to everything my family had built. He was dangerous, not just to Sweet Heritage, but to me. It was 2 a.m. when my phone rang. Lisa's voice, frantic on the other end. Malene, the restaurant's flooding. The pipes burst and water's everywhere. My heart dropped. I threw on a raincoat, grabbed my keys, and ran through the storm, the wind whipping my curls against my face. Bronzeville was a ghost town, the streets empty except for the roar of rain and the occasional flash of lightning. When I reached Sweet Heritage, the sight nearly broke me. Water poured through the front door, pooling on the hardwood floors my daddy had polished by hand. The photos on the walls, my grandparents, my father, decades of memories were curling at the edges, ink bleeding. Lisa was there, her sneakers soaked, dragging tables to higher ground. Darius, cursing under his breath, wrestled with a mop that was no match for the deluge. "We can't lose this place," I said, my voice shaking as I grabbed a bucket. "Not like this." We worked in a frenzy, stacking chairs, piling photo albums on the counter, shoving rags under the door to slow the water. The rain was deafening, a relentless assault, and every splash felt like a countdown. I was ankle-deep, my jeans clinging to my legs when the bell above the door chimed. I turned, expecting Renee or a neighbor. It was Elijah. He stood in the doorway, his white shirt plastered to his chest, rain dripping from his dark hair. The storm framed him, lightning flashing behind, making him look like some avenging angel. His eyes found mine, urgent but steady, and for a moment I forgot how to breathe. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice barely audible over the rain. "I was driving by," he said, stepping inside, water streaming off his shoulders. "Saw the lights. You need help." I wanted to tell him to leave, to keep his pity and his money and his too-perfect face out of my restaurant. But the water was rising and the photos, my family's heart, were slipping away. "Fine," I snapped. "Grab a bucket." He didn't hesitate. He rolled up his sleeves, his forearms corded with muscle, and dove in hauling tables with Darius, stacking boxes with Lisa, moving with a focus that made my chest tighten. The man I'd pegged as a cold-hearted developer was here in the mud and chaos, fighting for my legacy. I didn't know what to make of it. Hours passed, the storm raging outside as we battled inside. The air was thick with the smell of wet wood and desperation. My arms ached, my fingers numb from clutching soggy frames. At one point I slipped, and Elijah's hand shot out, steadying me. His grip was firm, his palm warm against my chilled skin, and the contact sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric. Our eyes met, and the world slowed, the rain, the chaos, everything fading except the heat of his touch. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low, almost lost in the storm. I nodded, pulling away, my heart hammering. "Keep working," I said, sharper than I meant, and turned back to the photos, my cheeks burning. By dawn, the rain had eased to a drizzle, and we'd saved what we could. The dining room was a wreck. Tables overturned, floors warped, but the photo albums were safe stacked, high on the counter. Lisa slumped in a chair, exhausted, while Darius muttered about needing a drink. I sent them home, promising to handle the rest. Elijah stayed physics. He lingered by the counter, wiping his hands on a rag, his shirt still clinging to him in ways I tried not to notice. The morning light filtered through the broken windows, pale and gray, casting soft shadows across his face. "You didn't have to do this," I said, my voice quieter now. "Why did you?" He looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Some things are irreplaceable," he said simply, his voice rough with fatigue. "I know what it's like to lose something that matters." The vulnerability in his tone caught me off guard. A crack in his polished armor. I wanted to ask what he meant, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I handed him a mug of coffee, the steam curling between us. Our fingers brushed as he took it, and that spark flared again, hotter this time, like a flame licking dry wood. I stepped back, my breath uneven, and busied myself with the albums, pretending I didn't feel the weight of his gaze. We sat on the floor, surrounded by the wreckage, sipping coffee in silence. The only sounds were the drip of water and the distant hum of Bronzeville waking up. A single candle flickered on the counter, its light dancing across Elijah's face, softening the hard lines of his jaw. He was close, too close, his shoulder inches from mine. I could smell the rain on him mixed with that damn cologne, and it made my head swim. "You're stronger than anyone I've met," he said suddenly, his voice low like a secret meant just for me. He turned to me, his eyes catching the candlelight, deep and endless. "This place, it's more than a business. I see that now." His words hit me hard, stirring something I didn't want to feel. I leaned toward him, drawn by the warmth in his voice, the flicker of the flame reflecting in his gaze. Our faces were close, his breath warm against my cheek, and I heard the soft hitch in his breathing, mirroring my own. My heart pounded a wild rhythm, and for one reckless moment, I wanted to close the distance, to feel his lips on mine, to let the world fall away. But I couldn't. Not with him. Not when he held the power to destroy everything I loved. I stood abruptly, the mug trembling in my hands. "You should go," I said, my voice tight. "Thanks for the help, but this doesn't change anything." He rose slowly, his expression guarded, but his eyes held a quiet intensity that made my stomach twist. "Good night, Malene," he said, and the way he said my name, soft like a caress, followed me as he left, the bell chiming behind him. I thought that night would bring us closer, that maybe, just maybe, Elijah Stone was more than the enemy I'd painted him to be. I was wrong. 2 days later, the community turned on me. A video surfaced online, grainy but damning, showing Elijah in a boardroom, his voice cold as he outlined plans to clear the Bronzeville site for development. The timestamp was recent, long after our walk, after the flood, after his promises. It spread like wildfire, shared on every local group, chat, every social media page. Customers stopped coming. Regulars, like Mr. Washington, avoided my eyes. Even Renee looked at me with pity, her voice gentle as she said, "I told you to be careful, Malene." I confronted Elijah outside his downtown office, the skyscraper looming like a monument to his world. The air was crisp, the city's noise a dull roar. He stood by his car, his suit pristine again, but his face was drawn shadows under his eyes. Was it all a lie? I demanded, my voice breaking as I shoved my phone in his face. The video paused on his image. The flood, the coffee, the understanding. "Was I just a game to you, Malene?" "I swear," he said, his voice urgent, his hands reaching for me. "That video, it's not what it looks like. I didn't save it." I cut him off, stepping back, my chest heaving. "I was a fool to think you could change. You're just like your company. Heartless." His face crumpled, but I didn't wait for an explanation. I turned and walked away, the city blurring through tears I refused to let fall. My heart felt like it was drowning all over again, and this time no one was there to save it. The days after the video felt like a slow bleed. Sweet heritage, once alive with laughter and the clink of glasses, was a ghost of itself. Tables sat empty. The phones stopped ringing, and the regulars who'd filled my Sundays with stories now passed by with tight smiles or avoided my eyes altogether. The whispers in Bronzeville were louder than the jazz at night. Malene sold out. She's in bed with the developer. Every accusation cut deeper, but none hurt as much as the betrayal I felt from Elijah Stone. I'd let him in, let him see my heart, and he'd played me, or so I thought. His face, his voice, the way he'd looked at me in the candlelight after the flood haunted me, but I buried it under anger. Anger was safer than heartbreak. I was in the kitchen kneading dough for cornbread when Renee pushed through the swinging doors, her locks swaying. "You see the news?" she asked, holding up her phone. The headline was a punch to the gut. Stone Development unveils ambitious Bronzeville project. The article quoted Edward Stone, Elijah's father, detailing plans for luxury condos, high-end retail, and not a single mention of sweet heritage. My hands stilled flour, dusting the counter like snow. He lied, I said. My voice hollow. All of it. The flood, the promises. It was all a game. Renee's eyes softened, but her voice was firm. I warned you, Malene. Men like that don't change their stripes. I nodded, but her words didn't ease the ache. I'd seen something in Elijah that night, something real, or so I'd thought. Now it felt like a mirage, shimmering and gone. I threw myself into work, scrubbing counters, rechecking inventory. Anything to keep my mind off him. But every creak of the floorboards, every chime of the bell made me hope stupidly that he'd walk through the door. He didn't. A week later, Lisa burst into the restaurant, her sketchbook clutched to her chest, her eyes wide with urgency. Malene, you need to see this, she said, shoving a stack of papers into my hands. They were financial documents, dense with numbers and legalese, but one line stood out. Elijah Stone had sold his entire stake in Stone Development to purchase the building that housed Sweet Heritage. Not the company, him personally. The deed was in his name, dated the day after our fight. My heart stuttered. This can't be right, I said, scanning the pages. Why would he do this? Lisa chewed her lip. I found it in the public records. He didn't tell anyone, not even his board, I think. I think he did it for you. The words hit like a tidal wave. I sank into a chair, the papers trembling in my hands. All this time I'd thought he'd betrayed me, but he'd been fighting for me in a way I hadn't seen, the video, the press conference. It didn't add up. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I drove to Elijah's office downtown, the city's skyline, a blur of steel and glass. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that misted my windshield. His building was a monolith, all sleek lines and cold efficiency, a world away from Bronzeville's warmth. I marched past the receptionist, ignoring her protests, and found Elijah in a corner office staring out at the city below. His suit was pristine, but his face was haggard, shadows bruising his eyes. Papers were scattered across his desk, and a half-empty coffee cup sat cold. Malene, he said, standing, his voice rough with surprise. What are you? Why didn't you tell me? I interrupted, slamming the documents on his desk. The sound echoed in the quiet room, sharp and final. You bought the building. You sold your shares. Why? He froze, his eyes flicking to the papers, then back to me. For a moment he looked almost vulnerable, like the man who'd waded through floodwater beside me. I didn't want you to think I was trying to buy your trust, he said, his voice low. I wanted to save what matters to you. No strings. His words were a knife cutting through my anger, but I wasn't ready to let go. No strings? I laughed, bitter and sharp. You let me believe you betrayed me. You stood there at that press conference while your father buried my restaurant. How am I supposed to trust you now? He stepped closer, his hands outstretched, but I backed away, the desk between us. The air crackled, charged with everything unsaid. Malene, I didn't know about the press conference, he said, his voice urgent. My father blindsided me. He's been planning this for weeks, waiting for me to slip. I'm trying to fix it, I swear. Fix it! I snapped, my voice rising. You can't fix a lie, Elijah. You can't fix a heart you broke. He moved then faster than I expected, closing the distance until we were inches apart. His hands gripped my arms, gentle but firm, and the heat of his touch seared through my jacket. I never lied to you, he said, his voice raw, his eyes burning into mine. Everything I did, the flood, the building, it was for you, because I can't stop thinking about you, Malene. Your strength, your laugh, the way you fight for this place. You're in my head every damn day. My breath caught my body betraying me as his words sank in. His face was close, too close. His lips, a whisper away. I could feel the warmth of his breath, the faint tremor in his hands, the way his chest rose and fell with each ragged inhale. The office lights cast soft shadows across his jaw, highlighting the tension there, the need. My pulse roared a wild drumbeat, and for one reckless second, I wanted to lean in to taste the promise in his eyes to let the world burn. But I couldn't. Not yet. I pushed him away. My hands shaking, and the space between us felt like a chasm. "Don't," I said, my voice cracking. "Don't make me weak. Elijah, I can't do this." His hands fell his expression, a mix of pain and resolve. "I'm not giving up," he said quietly. "Not on you. Not on us." I turned and left the click of my boots on the marble floor, echoing like a gunshot. The rain greeted me outside, cold against my burning skin. But it couldn't wash away the truth I was falling for him, and it terrified me. Back at Sweet Heritage, the silence was deafening. Darius was in the kitchen prepping for a dinner service that might not happen. Renee was at the bar, polishing glasses, her eyes tracking me as I slumped into a booth. "You okay?" she asked, sliding a glass of iced tea my way. "No," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I went to see him. He bought the building. Renee for me, but I don't know what to believe." She sat across from me, her hands folding over mine. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice soft. "I was hard on you about Elijah, maybe too hard. I was scared for you, but also jealous. You've got this fire, Malene, and he sees it. I didn't want you to lose yourself." Her confession hit me hard, and I squeezed her hand. "You're my family, Renee. I need you, not jealousy." She smiled, but it was tinged with worry. "Just be careful. He's giving up a lot, but that doesn't mean he's safe." I nodded, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying Elijah's words, his touch, the way his eyes had pleaded with me. I wanted to believe him, but trust was a fragile thing, and mine was cracked. That night I stayed late cleaning the restaurant alone. The dining room was dim lit only by a single lamp, its glow warm against the warped floors. I was wiping down the counter when the bell chimed and Darius stormed in his face, thunderous. "You're not going to believe this," he said, tossing a flyer on the counter. It was from Stone Development, announcing a community meeting to discuss the Bronzeville project, led by Vanessa, Elijah's colleague. "She's the one behind the video," Darius said, his voice low. "I heard it from a friend at the city council. She's been stirring things up, trying to make you look bad." My blood ran cold. Vanessa's smug smile, her hand on Elijah's shoulder. It all clicked. She wasn't just a colleague. She was a player in this game, and I was her target. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What does she want?" Darius shrugged. "Power, maybe, or him. Either way, she's trouble." I sank into a chair, the flyer crumpling in my fist. The pieces were falling into place, but they didn't make the hurt go away. Elijah hadn't lied about the video, but he'd kept me in the dark, and that was almost as bad. I needed time to think, to rebuild the walls around my heart. Closing time came, and I locked up the rain now, a soft patter against the windows. I stepped outside, the air cool and heavy with the scent of wet asphalt. Across the street, Elijah's car was parked, its engine idling. He stepped out, his silhouette sharp against the neon glow, his eyes finding mine in the dark. "Malene," he said, his voice carrying over the quiet street. "Can we talk?" I wanted to say no, to keep walking, to protect myself from the storm he'd brought into my life. But something in his voice, raw, almost desperate, stopped me. I crossed the street, my boots splashing in puddles, and stopped a few feet away. The street lamp cast a halo around him, highlighting the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched at his sides. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice breaking, "for not telling you about the building, for letting my father's games hurt you." I'm trying to make this right. But I need you to believe me." I looked at him, my heart torn between hope and fear. The rain clung to his hair, dripping down his face, and I fought the urge to reach out to wipe it away. "I don't know how to trust you," I said, my voice barely audible. "Not after everything." He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. "Then let me prove it," he said, his voice low, a promise wrapped in pain. "Give me a chance, Malene. Please." The air between us was electric, charged with 1,000 unsaid things. My body leaned toward him, drawn by the heat of his presence, the memory of his touch. But I stepped back, my hands trembling. "I need time," I said, my voice cracking. "I can't do this right now." He nodded, his jaw tight, but his eyes held a quiet resolve. "I'll wait," he said. "As long as it takes." I turned and walked away, the rain blurring my vision. My heart, a tangled mess of longing and doubt. Elijah Stone was rewriting my story, and I wasn't sure I could survive the ending. The rain had stopped, but the storm inside me raged on. Elijah's words echoed in my head, "I'll wait as long as it takes." They were a lifeline pulling me toward hope, but I was drowning in doubt. Sweet heritage was slipping through my fingers, and the community I'd fought for was crumbling under the weight of Stone Development's lies. Vanessa's video had poisoned Bronzeville against me, and Edward Stone's legal threats were a noose tightening around my neck. I wanted to trust Elijah, to believe he was the man who'd waded through floodwater for me, not the billionaire who'd stood silent while his father buried my dreams. But trust was a leap, and I wasn't sure I could jump. The notice came on a Monday, taped to Sweet Heritage's door, like a death sentence. Demolition scheduled in 90 days. My hands shook as I tore it down the paper, crumpling in my fist. Edward Stone had filed a lawsuit claiming Elijah's purchase of the building was invalid, a breach of fiduciary duty to the company. The legalese was a maze, but the message was clear. They wanted my restaurant gone, and they'd burn everything to make it happen. I called a community meeting that night, the dining room packed with neighbors, regulars, and small business owners. The air was thick with tension, the scent of coffee and fried okra mingling with the murmur of voices. Mr. Washington sat in the front, his hands folded, his eyes heavy with disappointment. Renee poured drinks, her locks swaying as she moved, while Darius leaned against the wall, his arms crossed, ready to fight. Lisa, her sketchbook open, was sketching the crowd, her mural now half-painted on the restaurant's exterior, a vibrant tribute to Bronzeville's history. I stood at the front, my heart pounding. "This is our home," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my chest. "Sweet Heritage isn't just my family's legacy, it's ours. Stone Development thinks they can erase us, but we're stronger than their money. I need your help to fight this." The room was quiet. Then Mr. Washington spoke, his voice slow but firm. "We trusted you, Malene. But that video, folks think you're working with them. How do we know you're still one of us?" The words stung, but I held his gaze. "I'm not with them. I never was. That video was a lie, and I'm going to prove it. But I can't do this alone." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some skeptical, others hopeful. Renee stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. "Malene's been here for us always. If she says she's fighting, I'm with her." Who else? Hands went up. Voices rising, and slowly the room came alive with determination. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As the meeting ended, Lisa pulled me aside, her eyes bright with urgency. "I found something," she whispered, handing me a USB drive. "It's proof. Vanessa faked the video. Screenshots, emails, everything. She sent it to a contact at Stone Development to leak it." I stared at the drive, my pulse racing. This was the key to clearing my name, to rebuilding trust. But it also meant facing Elijah again, and that was a battle I wasn't sure I could win. I found him at his apartment, a sleek penthouse overlooking the Chicago River. The doorman let me up, and when Elijah opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept in days, his shirt untucked, his hair mussed, his eyes shadowed but sharp. The city lights glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a cool glow across the room. The air smelled faintly of leather and coffee, a stark contrast to the warmth of sweet heritage Malene. He said, his voice rough with surprise. "I didn't think you'd—" "I know about Vanessa," I cut in, holding up the USB drive. "She faked the video. She's been playing us both." He took the drive, his fingers brushing mine, and the familiar spark flared hot and unwelcome. He plugged it into his laptop, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through the evidence emails between Vanessa and a PR firm doctored timestamps, a smug note about neutralizing the Johnson problem. When he looked up, his eyes were blazing, but not with anger, with guilt. "I should have seen it," he said, his voice low. "Vanessa's been after my position for years. I didn't think she'd go this far. Why didn't you tell me?" My voice shaking. "You let me think you betrayed me, Elijah. You let me carry that weight." He stepped closer, his hands hovering like he wanted to touch me but didn't dare. "I was trying to protect you," he said, his voice raw. "My father, Vanessa, the board, they're sharks. Malene. I thought I could handle them without dragging you into it. I was wrong." The honesty in his voice cracked something in me, and I felt the walls I'd built start to crumble. Outside rain began to fall again, a soft patter against the windows mirroring the rhythm of my heart. "You can't keep things from me," I said, stepping closer, my voice barely above a whisper. "If we're going to do this fight for the restaurant, for whatever this is, you have to be all in." His eyes searched mine, and the space between us shrank, the air thick with unspoken need. "I'm all in," he said, his voice a low growl, and then he was there, his hands cupping my face, his thumbs brushing my cheeks. The heat of his touch was a shock, sending a shiver down my spine. His breath was warm, unsteady, and I felt the tremor in his fingers, the weight of everything he'd held back. The city lights flickered behind him, painting his face in shades of silver and shadow, and for a moment I saw the man beneath the billionaire, the one who'd fought for me, who'd lost everything for me. I leaned in, or maybe he did, and our lips were inches apart, the world narrowing to the sound of rain, the scent of his skin, the wild beat of my heart. But before we could close the distance, my phone buzzed, shattering the moment. It was Renee, her voice urgent. "Malene, the lawyers are here. They're serving papers. You need to come now." I pulled back my chest, heaving, and Elijah's hands fell, his expression a mix of frustration and resolve. "Go," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll handle Vanessa. We'll fight this together." I nodded, my body still humming from his touch, and ran into the rain, the city blurring around me. The courtroom was a cold, sterile place, all polished wood and fluorescent lights, a far cry from Bronzeville's warmth. I sat beside my lawyer, a pro bono advocate named Ms. Carter, her sharp eyes scanning the documents. Across the aisle, Edward Stone's legal team loomed, their suits as intimidating as their client. Elijah was there too. In the back, his face unreadable, but his eyes locked on me. The sight of him steadied me, even as my nerves frayed. The hearing began, Edward's lawyer arguing that Elijah's purchase was a reckless misuse of company assets, that the building rightfully belonged to Stone Development. My stomach churned, but Miss Carter countered with evidence of Elijah's personal funds, the clean deed, and Vanessa's sabotage. The USB drive had done its job. Vanessa was conspicuously absent, her credibility in tatters. Then it was my turn to speak. I stood, my hands trembling, and faced the judge, the room, the community packed into the gallery. Mr. Washington was there, Renee, Darius, Lisa, even Aisha with her mother. Their eyes gave me strength. "This isn't just about a building," I said, my voice ringing clear despite the lump in my throat. "Sweet heritage is my grandparents' dream, born from a hot plate and a hope for a better life. It's my father's laughter, my community's heart. It's where we come to remember who we are. Stone Development wants to erase that, but we're not just brick and mortar. We're family, and family fights." The room was silent. Then a murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd, growing into applause. Mr. Washington nodded, his eyes shining, and Renee gave me a thumbs up. The judge called for order, but I felt the tide turning. Edward's lawyer faltered, his argument sounding hollow against the truth. Hours later, the judge ruled the deed was valid. Sweet heritage was safe. The gallery erupted cheers, echoing off the walls, and I sank into my chair, tears streaming down my face. Renee hugged me. Darius ruffled my hair, and Lisa waved her sketchbook like a flag. But my eyes found Elijah still in the back, his smile small but real. He'd fought for me, and I'd fought for us. That night, Sweet Heritage was ours again, and we celebrated in the only way we knew how, with food and music. The dining room was lit with candles, their flames dancing on the walls, and a local jazz band played, the saxophone's wail weaving through the air. I moved through the crowd, serving plates of cornbread and collards, laughing with Aisha, hugging Mr. Washington. But my heart was elsewhere, searching for Elijah. I found him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter. His tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. The candlelight caught the curve of his jaw, the faint stubble there, and my breath caught. "You didn't have to stay," I said, closing the door behind me. The music muffled, now the world shrinking to just us. "I wanted to," he said, stepping closer, his voice low and warm. "This is your victory, Malene. You did this. We did this." I corrected, my voice soft. The air between us was electric, charged with everything we'd fought for, everything we'd lost and found. He reached for me, his hand brushing my arm, and the touch was a spark igniting the need I'd buried for too long. He pulled me close, his hand sliding to my waist, and I didn't resist. The heat of his body pressed against mine, his breath warm against my ear. "I want you, Malene," he whispered, his voice a low growl that sent shivers down my spine. "Every day, every moment, you're my home." I tilted my head, our lips brushing soft at first, then hungry, desperate. The kiss was fire, consuming his hands, tightening on my hips, my fingers tangling in his hair. The candlelight flickered, casting shadows that danced with us, and I felt the world tilt, the kitchen fading, until it was just him, his taste, his touch, the wild beat of his heart against mine. We broke apart, breathless, and his eyes held mine, promising forever. "We're not done," I said, my voice trembling, "but sure, this is just the beginning." He smiled, his thumb tracing my cheek. "Together," he said, and I knew he meant it. Winning the courtroom battle felt like a miracle, but the bauta and real victory was what came after. Sweet Heritage was alive again, its doors flung wide, its tables filled with the laughter and stories that had always been its soul. Bronzeville buzzed with renewed energy, as if the neighborhood itself had taken a deep breath and exhaled hope. I'd fought for my family's legacy and won, but the truth was, I hadn't done it alone. Elijah Stone, the man I'd once hated, had stood by me, risking everything to save what mattered most, and somewhere along the way, between the floodwater and the courtroom, I'd fallen for him, hard deep, and irrevocably. Our story wasn't over. It was just beginning. The grand reopening of Sweet Heritage was a block party that spilled onto the streets of Bronzeville. The air was thick with the scent of BBQ ribs and peach cobbler, the sizzle of griddles mingling with the wail of a saxophone from a local jazz band. Kids ran through the crowd, their laughter bright, while elders like Mr. Washington swapped stories under the shade of a mural. Lisa had finished a vibrant tapestry of Bronzeville's history with my grandparents' faces at its heart. Neon signs glowed against the dusk, casting a warm light on the faces of neighbors, friends, and strangers who'd become family. I moved through the chaos, serving plates of cornbread, hugging regulars, and teaching Aisha how to braid dough for biscuits in the kitchen. The culinary school I'd dreamed of was now real. A small classroom in the basement, where I taught local kids the recipes my grandmother had passed down. Upstairs, the building had been renovated with affordable apartments instead of luxury condos, testament to Elijah's new vision for community-centered development. He'd started a consulting firm helping neighborhoods fight predatory developers, and it was taking off faster than either of us expected. The man who'd once measured success in skyscrapers now measured it in people in roots, in home. I caught sight of him across the crowd, laughing with Darius as they flipped burgers on a grill. His tie was gone, his sleeves rolled up, his hair slightly mussed from the heat. He looked lighter, freer, like the weight of his father's legacy had finally lifted. When his eyes met mine, a slow smile spread across his face, and my heart skipped the way it always did when he looked at me like that, like I was the only person in the world. "You're staring," Renee teased, nudging me as she passed with a tray of iced tea. Her locks were tied back, her smile warm but knowing. "Careful, girl. You're gonna burn a hole through him." I laughed, my cheeks heating. "Can you blame me?" "Look at him," me followed my gaze, then shook her head. "He's different now. You both are. But don't let him get too comfortable. Keep him on his toes always," I said, grinning, but my eyes stayed on Elijah. He caught me watching and winked a playful spark in his blue eyes that made my stomach flip. I turned back to the kitchen, trying to focus, but the pull of him was a current I couldn't resist. Later, as the party wound down, Elijah found me in the dining room where I was wiping down tables. The band had switched to a slow R&B tune, the melody soft and soulful, weaving through the air like a caress. The candles on the tables flickered their light, dancing on the walls, and the scent of jasmine from a nearby diffuser mingled with the lingering aroma of fried chicken. Most of the crowd had moved outside, leaving us in a quiet bubble, the world soft and warm. "You did this?" Elijah said, leaning against a table, his voice low and proud. "This place, this night, it's all you, Malene." I set down my rag, stepping closer, the space between us shrinking. "We did this," I said, echoing the words I'd said after the trial. "I couldn't have saved it without you." He reached for my hand, his fingers lacing with mine, and the touch was a spark, warm and electric. "I'd do it all again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "For you." My breath caught, and I felt the familiar pull, the need that had been building since the first time he walked into my restaurant. I stepped closer, our bodies inches apart, and the candlelight caught the curve of his jaw, the faint stubble there. His eyes were deep, endless, holding promises. I was finally ready to believe. "Dance with me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't hesitate. His hand slid to my waist, pulling me close, and we swayed to the music, the world fading until it was just us. The heat of his body pressed against mine, his breath warm against my temple, and I felt the steady thump of his heart under my palm. Every touch, every brush of his fingers was a flame igniting something deep and wild. I tilted my head, our lips grazing soft and teasing, and the air crackled with anticipation. A promise of more. But before we could sink into it, Darius poked his head in, grinning. "Y'all gonna burn the place down with that heat," he said, and I laughed, pulling back my cheeks, flushed. "Get out of here!" I said, swatting at him. But Elijah's hand stayed on my waist, his smile soft and unapologetic. A week later, Elijah surprised me with tickets not to Paris or Rome, but to Mississippi, where my grandparents had started their journey north. "I want to see where your story began," he said, his voice quiet but sure. "The roots that made you who you are." We drove through the Delta, the landscape a patchwork of cotton fields and cypress trees, the air heavy with the scent of earth and river. The bed and breakfast he'd booked was a small, weathered house overlooking the Mississippi, its porch strung with fairy lights that glowed against the twilight. That night we walked barefoot on a nearby beach, the sand cool under our feet, the river lapping softly at the shore. The sky was a canvas of stars, brighter than I'd ever seen, and the silence was broken only by the hum of crickets and the rhythm of our breaths. Elijah stopped turning to me, his face lit by the moon, its silver light tracing the lines of his cheekbones. "I've been everywhere," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "Owned more than most people dream of, but I've never felt like I belonged anywhere until now with you." My heart swelled and I stepped closer, the sand shifting under me. His hands found my waist, pulling me against him, and the heat of his body was a shock grounding me in the moment. "You're my home, Malene," he whispered, his lips brushing my ear, sending shivers down my spine. "I want to build a life with you every day, every fight, every laugh." I looked into his eyes, seeing the man he'd become, the one who'd traded his empire for my dream, who'd learned to love not just me, but the community I cherished. And I knew with a clarity that stole my breath that I loved him fiercely and forever. He kissed me then, slow and deep, his lips warm and hungry, his hands sliding up my back, pressing me closer. The world spun, the stars blurring above us, and I felt the sand beneath us as we sank to the ground, our bodies tangled, the river's song blending with the rush of our breaths. His fingers traced my collarbone, soft but deliberate, and every touch was a vow, every kiss a promise. The moonlight bathed us cool and silver, and I wanted to stay there forever, lost in him and us. We didn't go further, not yet, but the intensity of that moment, the weight of his body, the heat of his skin was enough to make my heart race, my body hum with need. When we finally pulled apart, breathless and laughing, he pressed his forehead to mine, his voice a whisper. "I'm yours, Malene, always." The next evening, under a canopy of southern stars, Elijah took me to a clearing where my ancestors had once walked. The air was warm, scented with magnolia, and the fireflies blinked like tiny lanterns. He stopped, his hand in mine, and when he turned to me, his eyes were steady, certain. "I don't want to be a billionaire anymore," he said, his voice clear, unwavering. "I just want to be yours every day for the rest of our lives." He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple ring from his pocket. Not the gaudy diamond the old Elijah might have chosen, but a band of woven silver, perfect for the man he'd become. "Malene Johnson, will you marry me?" Tears spilled down my cheeks, and I laughed, the sound bright and free. "Yes," I said, my voice trembling with joy. "Yes, Elijah." He slipped the ring onto my finger, his hands shaking, and then he was standing, pulling me into his arms, kissing me like the world was ending and beginning all at once. The stars spun above us, the fireflies danced, and I felt my grandparents' spirits in the air, smiling down on us. This was our story, unlikely and beautiful, written in struggle and love, back in Bronzeville. Sweet Heritage thrived, a beacon of community and resilience. Elijah and I argued sometimes, his instinct to throw money at problems, clashing with my belief in sweat, equity. But our fights ended in understanding and kisses that promised we'd figure it out together. We planned our wedding, a small affair with soul food and jazz, right in the restaurant that had brought us together. Looking back, I think about the day Elijah walked into Sweet Heritage, all arrogance and cold ambition. I'd hated him on sight, certain he'd never change. I was wrong. Sometimes the person you're meant to love comes in the last package you'd expect. Sometimes the hardest hearts have the greatest capacity for change. And sometimes when you refuse to give up, you get more than you ever dreamed. Elijah didn't just fall for me. He fell into a better version of himself, and I fell into a love story I never saw coming. Thank you for joining me on this wild, heartfelt journey. If this story of love, legacy, and second chances moved you, hit that like button and subscribe to catch more real-life romances every week. Drop a comment below what moment made your heart race, and tell me who's the person who changed your world. I can't wait to hear your stories.